How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, good. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, man. I thought we'd do today's show about, the story of our lives and really what will the story of your life be? The way that you think, approach life, your attitude, your practices, how you respond to life. That's really the story of our lives. And our narratives play a big role in that.
Oh, totally.
So
Yeah.
today's show is inspired by a author that we both like quite a bit, Gregory David Roberts, in his book Shantaram. So here goes. I'm going to read a little passage. It took me a long time in most of the world to learn what I know about love and fate and the choices we make. But the heart of it came to me in an instant while I was chained to a wall and being tortured. I realized somehow through the screaming of my mind that even in that shackled, bloody helplessness, I was still free to hate the men who were torturing me or to forgive them. It doesn't sound like much, I know, but in the flinch and bite of the chain, when it's all you've got, that freedom is a universe of possibility. And the choice you make between hating and forgiving can become the story of your life.
Yeah, powerful boy.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's a great selection from his stuff. He's an elegant writer and writes from experience. He has no formal training. I think he was a prisoner, and I think it was an Australian who was on the lam for some felony charge and ended up in India just to escape, and then found a number of revelations like this one that helped him deal with his life and his problems back in Australia. What do you get out of that passage, Keith?
When I read this book, it was recommended by a friend, and the way that it was written just really touched me because I thought it was so authentic.
Yeah.
In the way that he communicated himself. And I was with him through a lot of those experiences as he told his story. And this passage here, out of many, really, really resonated with me. And I think about with all the many of the situations in my life that I created meaning around. And when I say created meaning around them, I create meaning with almost all situations in my life or people. But with the ones that really impacted my life in a way that either created suffering or brought me peace and joy. And that narrative that I created about situations and about people, it really affected me, Rick, and it affected my life and the people that are around me. And it wasn't until I read this passage that I became really clear that I had a choice of the narrative that I created about everything that happened or about the people. And all the suffering that I was experiencing was tied to a narrative that was disempowering, that either included complaining or included judging other people and things like that. And it was just tremendous suffering related to it. And I got really clear that I was separate from the situation or the event that really happened. Like I was collapsing my story about the situation onto the event or onto the people as if they were one and the same, but they weren't. And I was not objective, I was subjective. And it was just a tremendous amount of suffering. And I look at my life and how I've spent it the last year, and I created a completely different story regarding the pandemic, regarding some changes that are happening in my personal life, and my wellness life, as well as my work at Mayo Clinic. And it's a different story. I mean, a lot of the same events regarding a lot of change, a lot of disruption would be what a negative narrative was, or a positive narrative would be opportunity. And so while the pandemic brought disruption and or opportunity, I chose to focus on the opportunity. The changes at work, which are significant because we're on this incredible growth trajectory at Mayo, I see opportunity, and I just told myself a completely different story. And I've gone back to many years ago with stories that I've had about family. And I now tell a different story. And it's one that has allowed me to be forgiving to my loved ones, to myself, to be accepting of who they are, and accepting of who they're not, and it's just been a completely different world for me, Rick. Same world, as Dwayne Dyer says, peaceful world or hostile world, same world. And my story has changed, and I really see a lot of goodness, man. What does the passage mean to you?
Well, man, it's a powerful thing. There's a lot packed into it. And I guess I'd start with the idea that he was realizing that the narrative that he had told himself about what his life was about was changing. And it was changing because of a very extreme circumstance. And hopefully none of us will ever be in that kind of an extreme circumstance, but it woke him up. And the Buddhists have an elegant way of expressing this, which is about, if you ask yourself at the root of who you are, what do you say? And of course, all of us start with, I'm old, I'm this age, I have this job, I'm married to this person, I have this much money. I mean, that's the narrative that people tell them. Usually what the Buddhists are looking for is a statement that's very simple, which is, I am awake.
Oof.
I am awake. It has a very obscure kind of mysterious meaning, but the reality of what it means is it's being in the present moment with nothing at it, being vulnerable, being accepting, being detached from the circumstance that's affecting you. So I start with the idea that Robert's, the author's, narrative up to that point had been something completely different that wasn't serving him in the minute that he was experiencing the torture. And he had to let go of that so that he wasn't hit twice, once by the arrow of the torture, and the second time by the arrow of your hate for other people. That double arrow is what he was rebelling against, to me, in that passage.
Yeah, I agree, man. How has that shown up in your life, Rick, from your own experiences?
Well, I was I still am an ego-based, greedy, judgmental, difficult person for a long time. Now I know it. And I've studied long enough, and I've meditated long enough, and I've tried to change that. So at least I'm aware of it, and I have things that I do to avoid that. Not so much that I feel happy about it, but I know that it's not right. I know that it's not the person I want to be, right?
Yes.
That's the old Gandhi deal. Why don't you sit down for a moment and just close your eyes and think, what would be the coolest thing for me to be? What do I really want to do? How do I want to relate to my family? How do I want to relate to myself? How do I want to relate to this job, making lots of money, not very happy? How do I want to relate to the world at large? And each of those threads, and there's tons and tons of threads, each of those threads allows you to examine where you are now and what your narrative is about your career, your job, your relationship to the world. And those things, once you make a decision about how you want that to go, you can start down the path of deciding how to maintain that, as Robert says, that freedom. Mandela, I can't remember if it was his last trial or one of his trials when he was put in prison for violating the apartheid rules in South Africa. The judge was sort of scolding him about being back in court as a protester, and he was going to levy the boom, and said to him, if you continue down this path, you're never going to have any freedom. And Mandela said, Your Honor, you can take away my liberty. That's what you're talking about. You're talking about depriving me of liberty by imprisoning me. That's all you can do. You can't take away my freedom.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, Rick, I love that, man. I think for me, I just love that I am awake, the Buddhist man saying I'm awake. And that really struck with me, man. You just always are teaching me, and that was beautiful. And I'm taking that with me, man. That's already part of my practice. I breathe it in. It's in the pores, man. It's in the pores. So I think a lot of the narratives that and suffering that are tied to those narratives are an attachment. It can be an attachment to titles, you
Yeah,
know,
sure.
or roles we play. You know, I'm a parent, and you're never able to shut it off, and I am this kind of person in relationships, and this is how they have to go. And then you've been divorced for 20 years, but you're still living as if you're still married to that person, and you bring that narrative with you about what future relationships should be, and things like that, because of the story that you've told yourself about that one, or how you show up in the workplace. I'm this way or that way, and I
Yeah.
think that for me, I don't want to be attached to a title because it brings suffering. So anything that challenges that title or challenge what I think is my authority or my role or not being valued creates suffering for me. And so for me, it's just situational how life shows up.
Yeah.
Okay, one moment I might be the speaker, the next minute I'm wiping down tables, you know,
Yeah.
and that one moment I may be asked to lead something, another moment I'm the student, you know, and so I'm none of those things, or I'm just situationally those things. And I think by being flexible in my thinking and resisting having an identity that I'm tied to or attached to, allows me not to take things personally, allows me not to create stories in which I hate other people, or I create enemies of them, or I resist situations that I have no control over changing in that moment. There may be things that I can do over the long term that make a small contribution to affecting the situation. But over the long term, man, I am just really trying to be aware like you are, so that we're human beings, and so we're meaning making machines. And I want to make meaning. If I'm going to make a meaning, I want it to be a meaning that invites kindness, invites being loving, compassionate, empathetic, and that helps me be peaceful and experience a lot of joy. So my stories have certainly changed over the years.
And I would add to that, Keith, that you're a wonderful example of someone whose mission is to serve. And service, I think, is automatically builds into us a sense of humility that prevents us becoming too attached to our narrative. If we're serving other people in a way that's completely altruistic, and we're not looking for any feedback to give us credit for that service, there's something that comes from that. There's like a magical inspiration that comes to your soul from serving other people. And that keeps not only us humble, but it keeps us vulnerable to understanding some of the deeper meanings. And by vulnerable to deeper meaning, I mean sometimes deep meaning could be hurtful about yourself. And that's okay. That's part of the richness of this tapestry we call life. And so I guess what I'm saying is that the service component, the humility component, was there in Robert's mind when he was talking about, I have a choice between hating my torturers or not. And I thoroughly believe that service and humility are two of the most amazing, powerful characteristics that you can find and develop in yourself that will prevent, or at least inoculate a little bit against your suffering and the ego defenses that are always present at every moment in every human's life.
Absolutely, Rick. And, I'll just add to that before we go, with respect to what you said of the choice to hate or not hate your captors. That is just not in a situation like that where there's imprisonment and torture going on, but there is also the metaphorical, torture that we do to ourselves by, for example, carrying resentment during a divorce and children are involved. Like, you have a choice there. If your significant other or former partner is not being cooperative, you got a choice to be resentful, or you have a choice to let it go so that you are serving your family, your children, yourself, by letting that go, by accepting them exactly the way they are, by not creating a narrative that continues to feed or reinforce those feelings of resentment, that's a choice. If you feel like you've been wronged in a situation, whether it's, with a friend, with family, with your employer, that's also a choice of that. Now, maybe what they did was intentional, but you still have a choice to see meaning in it that informs how you are going to choose to show up the next day. And some of that may require you to put healthy boundaries in place so that if there is abuse, that it doesn't continue, or if there is a lack of valuing your efforts doesn't take place. You can still make a choice without creating a narrative or a story that causes suffering for you and for others. I've seen just from my own friends who've gone through some relationship shifts with who they were married to or in a relationship with, and that story spins so quickly, that narrative so quickly, that you can just see the suffering just rising, all around them, and it's easy to think that it's a situation, and it doesn't have to be. You can create another story to where you can create some meaning. And in my own life, when I have moved on from one situation to another, sometimes involuntarily, because of my choices, no one
That's
forced me.
Keith 1.0.
Yes, Keith 1.0. No one forced me out, but I act as if they did. In those cases, man, I spent some negative narratives about it. But now I look back, and in situations that have subsequently occurred, I look back on me transitioning to another space or another role as something completely different. Like, okay, I'm going to bring the lessons that I learned from that situation, which are valuable to me, to be better than I was before. I have a friend who switched positions at work, and she is a leader, man. She's such an amazing leader. And, we're going to have a conversation coming up soon, in which she is quickly with the practice transition from, this wasn't working for me, to what can I learn about myself that could have been different, in that situation that wasn't to my liking, or that could have been better. Man, you know how hard it is for people to make that leap, to make that shift in such a short period of time. My admiration for her is through the roof, Rick, because I certainly didn't behave that way. I brought my stories with me of hating and judging and being upset. So,
I bet you that's an interesting point about your friend who is starting down the path with her practice. It might be a cool thing to have her do a show with you.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Well,
I'll mention it to her. I don't have her permission to mention her name, but
okay.
but hopefully she knows who she is. But she's just the kindest person, man, and just a servant leader, and just watching her add this new dimension to her well-being. Oh, it's beautiful, man. And she's in a different role, and she attributes it to the different role that is giving her life back. And I would encourage her to consider, it's not the role, because you can go to, I've seen a lot of people switch zip codes. I mean, it's switch, geographical locations in terms of countries. And it's just the same them is showing up there. But it's her what she's learned and learning from her practice that is different, that is making her experience of life different, that's creating that space for peace and for joy. So, and I think she's coming to that. So Rick, man, great show, man.
Yeah, I would encourage you to push her to come to the show. I think one of the things that's really helpful is to find people who are like-minded, who are struggling or going through a kind of practice orientation from an old way, the 1.0 way, into the 2.0, and to have as many of those people as possible as your friends and in your network, because it's mutually reinforcement, like you and I and others. That's really, really great. And she would be doing a great service to other people, because she would be explaining her personal journey and what the benefits have been and what some of the obstacles have been and how she's coped with them. And I think that kind of sharing is really important. So please, whoever you are, Keith's friend, boss, colleague, consider coming on the show with Keith. I think you'd be doing a service to all of the rest of us.
That's awesome, Rick. Thank you so much, man, for making the invitation. I'll ask her. Thanks, Rick. I love you.
I love you, buddy. Adios. Say hi to all my buds up there.
Okay, I will for sure.